The yellow school bus is one of the most recognizable vehicles and icons in America. But have you ever stopped to think about how it helped shape the country we know today or where it's headed next? If you're in this industry, of course you have. But regardless of your answer, I think you're going to love this month's guest. First, let me quickly thank the sponsor of the route, IC Bus. The next generation is here and is ahead of its class. Let's get rolling. As America celebrates its 250th anniversary, I want to take a step back and look at student transportation through a wider lens. That's why I invited Curt Macysyn, Executive Director of the National School Transportation Association, or NSTA, to be my guest today. Curt and I discuss how school transportation has evolved from a large community need into the largest mass transit system in the U.S. We explore some of the biggest issues facing the industry today, like driver shortages, federal legislation, illegal stop-arm passing, funding, and AI. But what I found most interesting is his perspective on the people behind student transportation and why a strong sense of community remains essential to our future. But I want you to hear that directly from Curt, so check out our conversation right now. Okay guys, now I'm joined by Curt Macysyn, Executive Director of the NSTA, our industry's contractor association, if any of you didn't know that. Thank you, Curt, for joining us once again on the route.
Hey Amanda, my pleasure. Great to see you.
Yes, you too, always. We have a packed agenda of things to run through with you. Before we get into legislation and history, give us a really brief overview. What's going on with NSTA right now? Things that you've advocated for on Capitol Hill. I know you just had your bus in, and some legislative work.
Yeah, for sure. Who can believe it's already July? We started the year in Fort Lauderdale, as you know, with our Midwinter meeting. Had a great turnout down there. We were fortunate, enough to be on the south end of Florida at the same time the NCAA football national championship game was being held. So there were a lot of Indiana fans, in the area and in our hotel. But it was a great conference. We hit a lot of great notes along the way, had some great speakers and presentations, and then we kind of flow into our bus in where we were in Washington, D.C. In early March, and we talked about two key initiatives, primarily the Break for Kids Act and then the Driving Forward Act, which have been NSTA legislative priorities. So we did about 85 Hill visits in congressional offices with our members. We had 65, 70 folks there supporting the effort to go up to Capitol Hill and put a face on private contracting in the nation's capital. I guess was time well spent, because in the recent markup of the House Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill, both of those initiatives were included, at least in the House markup. So we can talk a bit later about ultimately what's going to happen with that and other initiatives in Washington, D.C. But, so far so good for us on that end. And I also have to put in a last bit plug for the Clean School Bus program that we have been at NSTA lobbying in support of with both congressional offices and with the Environmental Protection Agency to continue that $5 billion funding initiative through the current authorization. And then I always like to look forward, so perhaps into future reauthorizations down the line. So it's been, a busy spring heading into, summer here, and just, on the cusp of our annual meeting and convention too in Denver.
And then not to mention your school bus driver international, I'm getting the order that
the
mixed up.
Safety,
the rodeo.
Safety competition is always in there. We had a great planning process from 2025 into 2026. So what we wanted to do was support a lot of the feeder competitions. So those state, provincial, regional competitions that serve as the, if you will, the source of drivers for us who can ultimately compete at the international safety competition in Austin, Texas. And it did see an increase in driver participation this year. We were up about 40% in drivers. We had more attendees this year. So,
Awesome.
it was a great event. And we think that our engagement with the local competitions has increased their ability to host competitions, and I think also has the byproduct of being able to foster that next generation of leadership that is going to pull these safety competitions forward. Because I think at one time we were concerned, like, oh, who's going to be the next generation to take over the lead in hosting these competitions? And I think we're a long way towards that goal. And so I'm really pleased with the results this year and enthusiastic about the future of the safety competitions, not only at NSTA, but at the local level too.
I mean, it's such a source of, energy, inspiration, of teamwork for these drivers, and to get to do something like that, and for the folks who win, it just means so much, and we're happy to support that event.
Yeah, no, we appreciate your sponsorship in that regard. As you mentioned, it's really an event where we have the opportunity to support our bus drivers, to highlight their training, professionalism, skills. I think it's really interesting. The more that you're involved with it, you see the passion that these drivers have, for their trade, for their craft. They're always giving us feedback, which is great. Some of it we take, some of it we don't, because it is a competition. All we promise them is fair competition. These folks, want to get the specs on the bus. So what equipment are we using? What's the course look like? Because they want to practice before they get to Austin. And so a lot of their questions just demonstrate their dedication to their craft of being a school bus driver, which is really great to see.
Yeah, it is. And these events just really highlight the people who, they literally drive our children to their education every day, and they can't get enough love for that.
Yeah, it gives you if you don't have it already, an appreciation for what they do on an everyday basis.
Yeah, thank you, school bus drivers everywhere. Curt, let's shift gears here a little bit. We are on the cusp of, well, by the time this comes out, we're probably just slightly past, but America's 250th big milestone for the industry. Now, when you look back at our country and our industry and how those intersect, what do you see as the most important milestones that student transportation has contributed to America?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is when you think about the school bus, it really is a piece of Americana. It's something that is very much attached to the United States of America, something where it has provided, and if you hear some of the stories, especially in my world of representing private school bus operators, some of the great stories that come out of our private operators and their companies and legacy companies within student transportation, they're really great stories where some of these individuals were engaged with farming, and people approach them about, hey, and this is probably going back into the 1920s or 1930s, people in the community would approach them and say, hey, we need a way to get these children to school. Any interest on your end? And it was like, yeah. And so now we've created this concept that has evolved over a number of years. So if we'd probably be aghast if we looked at what they were transporting these children in the 1930s, but that bus has evolved over time. When I go around to bus yards across the United States, it's one of my favorite things to do. I see the passion of not just the drivers, but all those folks who go into making student transportation. Mm-hmm. But the thing I marvel at is the explosion of technology and the things that we can do on those buses that was not heard of 20 years ago, not really thought about largely even 5 years ago. And the evolution keeps coming, and every time I kind of think, well, have we hit the limit with respect to technology? There's always somebody much smarter than I am who's inventing or coming up with a concept that makes things even better. So
Yeah.
it definitely, Amanda, keeps me on my toes, but I really enjoy that part of the job and seeing the evolution of technology. And it's not just technology for technology's sake, it's the actual implementation of that
Yeah.
technology that I think is so great. Like, how are we using things to make student transportation even better? And those are the things that I really marvel at and enjoy learning and enjoy engaging with those people who are, putting together, oftentimes behind the scenes, this great transportation structure we know that is, and I have to put the plug in, the largest mass transit system in the United States, and that's school bus transportation.
In ways, our industry hasn't changed all that much. And then in ways, it's like night and day, right? Like, I think if time travel were a thing, right? And someone visited modern times from, those 1920s, 1930s days. I mean, the AI cameras, the telematics. I mean, it's nuts what we can do now.
Yeah.
Within the contractor market specifically, you alluded to already, you have some really, I guess, legacy members who've really shaped the industry. Some really big, moves that have been happening thanks to some of these early pioneers. What are the ones that you would want to call out specifically?
Boy, that's a tough question. I mean, I just look at the overall, big picture in the landscape, and I see, so many changes that continue to come our way. And I oftentimes, think about how these changes have, they don't just occur in a vacuum. And and there's a lot of people that came before us that have created a foundation. And I look at student transportation as always kind of evolving and getting better. And I look at that landscape and I'm just kind of happy to be part of it. I'm always optimistic about the future because I just see the level of commitment. And there's always this notion that people, things are never going to be the same way, or, individuals aren't replaceable, but I just continue to see the waves of new people coming into student transportation. And I see the evolution of technology. And I think, man, we're in a great place. But 5 years from now, we're going to be in an even better place, because of all this. So I think overall, my view is that the sky's the limit in terms of the student transportation field, and that wherever I go, try to do the best I can to have people think about student transportation as a career and a vocation. And it's not just drivers, although we love our drivers, that, if that's not for you, man, you can be a dispatcher, or you can be a vehicle maintenance technician. I mean, there's so many roles that one can play in it. And the one thing I do impart to people is when I go around and I talk to individuals and how they entered the field of student transportation, when you talked about the legacy companies, and of course, if you grow up in the industry, it probably, there's a good chance that if grandparents were in it and parents were in it, you might be in student transportation. But I find a whole lot of people who are trained as nurses, for example.
Yeah.
Or I came across somebody who went to school and was trained as a financial planner, and then all of a sudden found his way into student transportation. And then they're locked in and they stay in because they enjoy it. Tell folks, always keep an open mind. And when I talk about student transportation, I think it's people are more kind of, they obviously know about the yellow bus, right? Who doesn't know about a school bus? But I think they're oftentimes intimidated as to the operational side of the equation, like what all goes into that. And they're curious about it. And let's not kid ourselves, it is complex. But I think we find that we're in part of a group of very civically minded individuals who, if you think of the concept of the school bus itself, is a civically driven initiative, because people have to want to band together and say, hey, for the good of the cause, let's get all our children on this bus. It's going to be safer for them. Now, what's the trade-off on that? Okay, there's got to be one person first on the bus, There's got to be one person last on the bus and in reverse on the way home. But that's also community spirit that, life is a little bit about give and take. And people kind of enter this field willing to give to their community, professionally, because the hours are what the hours are. These guys, our folks have to wake up very early to do what they do.
An early bird.
So yeah, so I just look at it and I kind of marvel at the fact that, and I want to highlight it because it's like these are so many civically minded folks who get in this profession and do it for the good of the cause, which in reality, maybe we don't see it as much as we should these days.
When we look at that evolution, what are some of the lessons from the past that you think are still relevant today, or what themes are we still working through?
I think organization is paramount. Like the level of organization that goes into what we do in student transportation is still important. Not everything is going to be handled by AI, even though AI is going to be a great enhancement for and is a great enhancement already for student transportation. But you still need that human element to be organized. So let me give you an example. You take bus routes. AI can put together the bus route. Hey, this is the most efficient. But there's still somebody that has to be there that has the local knowledge of the community and go like, no, you actually don't want to try and make a left turn at this intersection, especially from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the morning. And so I look at that as, we still have to have a level of organization. We can't fall back on AI. It's going to be an enhancement, but folks still have to have, their own systems in place that is going to make the enhancements given to us through AI even better. So another example is with vehicle maintenance. There could be things that the AI tells us, oh, it's time to do this or it's time to do that. But once again, you still need someone to provide that maintenance. And since we transport the most precious cargo, there's got to be that high level of commitment and dedication to doing things right as well.
I want to pivot once more and talk to you about some legislation and regulation, because many of the states just recently or are just about to finish their legislative sessions across the U.S. So what are some of the policies that we did see come through some of these sessions? What are you still watching? What were some of the wins, the losses from across the whole country?
Yeah, there's been a good level of robust activity at the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. We recently had a meeting with Administrator Bars, and I have to tell you, I was impressed at their commitment to ensure integrity in the system. And one thing, and I did not even realize this, but one change that has come around is in the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse.
Yeah.
For folks who are newly registered, they will have to provide a real ID to get personal registration in the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse portal. And that just, and then speaking to the administrator about that, him telling us how many, we'll call them orphan records are in that database, because there wasn't this check and balance in place. And so the integrity is now that people register, we'll have to know that they're actually real individuals in there in the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. And, those kind of changes, I guess, are long overdue. We see some of that in other areas that they're trying to do at, FMCSA. So I think, some of the changes have been welcome changes, if you will, from our standpoint, because it's important that system has and maintains integrity, within it. Obviously, on our end, we take extra steps because we're transporting children, but overall, we're still engaged, all of us, whether you're driving a school bus or just driving your own passenger vehicle, engaged with commercial motor vehicles every day that we're driving. So I think it's important to us in student transportation. I'm confident with our level of accountability and integrity within student transportation, and we were pleased to hear that there's this commitment at least from Washington, D.C., to ensure that that level of integrity continues within the CDL system.
Yeah.
Other things that we're working on, I mentioned the Clean School Bus program through EPA. That's been a bit of a push and pull with the agency. We see some light at the end of the tunnel with respect to the deployment of rounds 4 and 5 from the original program. We see some conversations that are occurring on the Hill. I think one of the impediments these days is the lack of bipartisanship on Capitol Hill. And from our standpoint, all of our initiatives, we make them bipartisan. And Clean School Bus is along the same lines. We think that there is an opportunity to make it bipartisan. And listen, you're not going to play Russian roulette with who, especially with the margins the way they are. Who's going to control Congress, the House, who's going to control the Senate. So it just makes sense for us to be bipartisan in nature. And then when things like I talked about, if we could get Clean School Bus in as a surface transportation reauthorization as a bipartisan initiative, then hey, all our jobs are much easier, that we're not trying to push that, that 800-pound boulder up the hill, when we're doing it. So I think it's important that I want to emphasize, we see some light at the end of the tunnel with respect to EPA and the furtherance of the existing Clean School Bus programs, especially rounds 4 and 5. So I can't really point out any misses so far.
That's good.
We could be in the same place next year, and I could say, yeah, well, I was just off on that one. But at this point, I have a great deal of optimism on a lot of the initiatives that we're pursuing.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful that, like, when we speak to regulators, whether that's with National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, FMCSA, DOT, whoever, there seems to be an open dialogue, and real partnership there. In fact, we typically get Michelle Atwell from NHTSA at our meetings to speak. So there's really this partnership that we formed, and so that gives me a great deal of optimism as we move forward. So no misses in 2026.
Yeah, which is great. Now I want to ask about one other thing we didn't touch on too directly yet, and that's another initiative NSTA has really been leading is a national PSA about the dangers of illegal stop arm passing. It's kind of included in the bills that you mentioned earlier in our interview, but do you have an update on where that stands and when we might see that start to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it was included in the surface transportation, the House side surface transportation reauthorization. It's a national PSA, public service announcement campaign about the dangers of illegal school bus passing. Like I said, it's in the current House side. It did go through markup. That is actually one of the areas where Congress, I think, is still working in a bipartisan framework, is when you get to those reauthorization bills and the Democratic House side and the Republican House side kind of get together on the priorities, and that make their way through markup. Now, everything doesn't make their way through markup, so I think at least some of our initiatives have carried weight on both sides of the aisle, which is a great thing. The thing we have to keep an eye on is the Senate going to take this up?
Yeah.
Are people going to wait because we are in an election year? Are they going to wait for lame duck session, when the pressure's off and the elections have been decided? Or do we have to wait till next Congress to take this up again? And I think that's the $64,000 question at this point, is this going to make it over the finish line this year? And it's not for lack of support. It's because of the political dynamics at work. So we'll keep an eye on that. We always say we want a campaign similar to Click It or Ticket. We go around the summer months. Those billboards are out there. I'm in the car, I'm driving somewhere, and I hear the Click It or Ticket campaigns. However they invented that, whenever they did that, man, it increased seatbelt usage from, to probably like about 98% of people in their vehicles use seatbelts. So we think the same thing can happen with illegal school bus passings, especially in light of the NHTSA survey that they did, that people are all over the place in terms of why they do it. the perceptions were from don't care, which I don't understand
I
personally,
know,
you know,
right?
because you're driving around a school bus, to, yeah, I was in a hurry. I knew I shouldn't do that, but I was in a hurry. I was late for work. To the other one, I didn't know that this was a law, even though the buses with a actual stop arm extended and flashing lights weren't going to give you an indication that you perhaps should stop behind this stationary school bus. And I also want to put a plug in. We're working with Katrina Morris over at the Michigan Association
Yeah.
of Pupil Transportation on doing some of our own PSAs to kind of prime the well, if you will, with respect to what a campaign could look like. So last year we did it with Ryan Brees, who's a NASCAR driver. This year we have something else in store. I won't disclose that
Well,
until
stay
we launch
tuned.
it, but there's something else in store. So, like I said, to give the members of Congress and folks at NHTSA something to latch onto once we get Break for Kids over the finish line.
Yeah, good updates. If there was one legislative or regulatory change that you think policymakers misunderstand about our industry, what would that be?
Whew. I'd say for my own reasons, I haven't talked about the Driving Forward Act, which would allow us to get drivers a K-restricted intrastate license when they go through the process and waive the under the hood testing requirement. And the reason I bring that up is I think oftentimes it's misunderstood across the commercial motor vehicle landscape. And I think folks aren't appreciating the fact that our bus drivers do not repair vehicles. So this is something that was put in, and I mentioned this to Administrator Bars, that if we talked about the time machine and going back, if we went back to the mid 80s when the CDL was implemented, I think what we would have done is, knowing what we know now, of course, is we would have bifurcated the commercial motor vehicle space to school bus and freight, because school bus operators are swept in a whole level of regulations that really aren't germane to what we do. And this is one of them, where for our drivers to get licensed, they actually have to go in, physically lift the hood of the bus and identify engine components. And it is intimidating for a lot of people because we get folks, going back to my thought about civically minded individuals who may retire from a district. They may be a coach and they want to keep driving the wrestling team.
Mm-hmm.
Or we've heard of people who are, believe it or not, former superintendents who I just want to stay active, and they pick up on driving a bus in retirement. These are the people that are, in a lot of cases, coming in to get positions as school bus drivers in retirement. And the fact that there's one run in the morning, afternoon run, is attractive to them because they're not now, they don't want to be in a full-time job. They retired, but they want to remain active. And then to tell those people, now you got to identify engine components. For some of them, you got to lift the hood, whether they're older or shorter or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
in an area where we're not repairing the vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no way, shape, or form is a bus driver because you can't leave the students. Now, I understand we've all driven around and we've seen a tractor trailer with the cab up and somebody in there looking under the hood to try to repair something who's probably several hundred miles away from home base.
Right.
That's not us.
No.
So this is a palpable impediment because people are intimidated by I got to identify engine components. And if we ask that, if that was the litmus test for people to get driver's licenses, how many less regular passenger vehicle driver's licenses would we get? I think it just makes sense in what we do that we remove that impediment. And I think our approach has been a common sense approach to this. And I think it has the byproduct of assisting with the school bus driver shortage that,
Right.
you write about every September and I hear about across the country. So I would say that would be one thing where I would ask people, just take a step back, understand what we're asking for, understand the rationale behind it, and see how this could be beneficial across all 50 states. And we got 14 or 15 states now, but if we did this in all 50 states, how much better the driver pool would be.
Okay, Curt, you mentioned take a step back. Now I want you to take a big step back. And if we get out that crystal ball that's probably tucked in your desk somewhere, and we think about America's 300th celebration, what do you think the industry might look like in 50 or so more years? And what are some of the defining moments today that will shape that future?
Well, I think one of the defining moments is going to be AI, and I think to the level that it can be used properly, it can be a game changer for student, transportation, and it can assist with creating and enhancing a system that, as I mentioned earlier, by its nature is very complex if used properly. I still think there's going to be the human element involved in student transportation for the foreseeable future. I don't see a situation where parents will be comfortable with a driverless school bus.
Yeah.
I think one of the questions that we're going to have to answer along the way is getting a handle on student management and what that looks like moving forward. And I think it has such an impact on our ability to attract and retain drivers that we've got to come to grips on, what that looks like. I think the other thing is, and perhaps the mindsets around the country are shifting, but when we went through the throes of COVID, society became very individualistic, down to folks really looking at student transportation. And we see it with some of the apps that were created that get kind of individual drivers taking individual students to school.
Sure.
And we know the schools were not built, especially the older schools, weren't really built for passenger vehicle traffic to begin with. But even the newer schools are not built for that level of passenger vehicle traffic. So one school bus, we use the figure, takes approximately 36 passenger vehicles off the road, right? But then came COVID and this idea like we're in a more individualistic society. I've seen some of that change recently where people are like, okay, yeah, no, the school bus is very important and we need to embrace the school bus. But I think there are some folks out there still are viewing the need for immediate response, which unfortunately isn't the school bus because there are stops along the way. But I want to press a button and I want to have somebody at my driveway to pick my student up. And I hope that we can get back to days where I said we're thinking civically and we're saying what is good for the rest of the community. And that is if the yellow bus is thriving and picking up students and all of us give a little bit, whether it's time. Hopefully we can get back to folks looking at things and approaching them from a community standpoint instead of an individual standpoint. We all have wants, needs, and desires, but at the end of the day, we all have to exist with each other. Yeah. And I think our politicians are going to have to lead the way in that. They're going to have hard conversations with their constituents in that I'm making decisions in the best interest of the community, and that may fly in the face of what you want individually right now.
I mean, just like in, teams, the boss needs to make decisions for the betterment of everyone under them, and, each individual player should look up to that person to have their best interests in mind. Same can be said for our country. Great point. Okay, Curt, final thoughts. Is there anything else we didn't talk about you want to quick plug, mention, etc.?
The only thought I have, and it's probably a good time to bring this up in the 250th anniversary of the country. So know where you're going. You also have to know where you've been. And I think student transportation does that very well. And I hope that folks who might be tuning in to this take stock this 250th birthday of the country to understand how fortunate we are to live here, and that over the course of those 250 years, there have been a lot of challenges. So this current era is not, well, the challenges may be different. The fact that the country's had those challenges previously and overcome them. And it's all been through the fact of getting back to community. And I think if we keep our eye on that, then we can overcome whatever challenges, we have in 2026.
That is very well said.
Thank you.
Awesome. Curt, well, this has been such an interesting and fun conversation. Thank you again for being here, sharing your insights. Folks, follow along with NSTA for everything that they're working on, and of course, School Bus Fleet for more news and updates. But thank you, Curt.
No, thank you, Amanda. Always a pleasure. Look forward to seeing you on the circuit for the remainder of 2026. And
yes, busy
as weird as
summer.
it is to say, 2027 will be right around the corner.
All right, folks, if you missed our coverage of the winners of the National Safety Competition, head to our website to see who took home the honors this year. We'll put the link in the description below as well. We love following along with NSTA's work for everything they do for the industry on Capitol Hill and beyond, and I hope you stay tuned to them as well, even if you're not a private contractor. With that, you can find more school bus headlines and hot topics on our website anytime. Be sure to follow our YouTube channel and connect with us on social media. Another big thank you again to our sponsor of the route, IC Bus, proudly offering vehicles and solutions that are ahead of their class. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for riding with us.